A man who worked every day as a corporate slave dies and is reincarnated as the lord of a remote village in this new life. He is determined to build his village. With his own strength awakens in the body of a 2-year-old boy. A servant approaches him. Worried that he might fall unexpectedly, the 2-year-old begins speaking about the breathtaking scenery around him, leaving the servant confused about where he learned such complex words. Noble child's name, Van, with vague memories. He realizes that the servant in front of him is named Tiru, and his father is Marquis Jalpa Biladi Virtu. Unfortunately, he still doesn't know the name of the place where he has been reincarnated. At the dining table sit his father and Vin's siblings. Jalpa asks his second son, Jar, what he learned today. Nervous and frightened, Jar answers that he studied fire magic and battle reform. Meanwhile, Van calmly replies that he doesn't know anything yet, so he plans to start by learning about the culture and history of their country. His siblings are shocked, and their father even laughs after hearing his answer. Thinking that Van is an impressive child despite being only 2 years old, Jalpa begins to hope that Van will inherit fire magic like he and his late wife. In this world, magic is extremely important for nobles. They usually wish to possess one of the 4 elemental magics: fire, water, wind, or earth. If they possess something outside those elements, they will be looked down upon by other nobles and considered a disgrace. Van begins his days by learning the basic knowledge of the world according to the other servants. A 2-year-old should not be able to understand Tiru's complicated explanations. Surprisingly, Van has no problem with it at all because he is eager to learn. Not long after, a male servant named Esparta arrives with a frightening expression. He raises his fingers and asks Van how many there are. Van becomes confused and nervous before answering. 5 from that moment on. The servant dedicates himself to becoming Van's academic tutor. After several weeks of what feels like hellish lessons, Van finally learns how to read and write. Especially in his country's language, the lessons become increasingly difficult, and before he realizes it, 2 years have passed. At the age of 4, Van begins training with future soldiers and manages to keep up with them. The vice commander of the Night Order, De, suddenly becomes interested in him and offers to teach him swordsmanship. Thus, a series of extreme training sessions begins and struggles under Dai's brutal training. Even so, he feels that his days since reincarnating have been enjoyable, and he wants to cherish these moments. By the age of 6, people begin to see Van as a genius. However, behind that reputation are the harsh lessons from Esparta. Feeling exhausted, Van sometimes wishes he could just play around and act like a lazy child, so people would see him as normal. One day, Tiru invites him to visit the market there. They encounter a father who is heartlessly trying to sell his own child as a slave. Van asks how much the child costs. Judging from the child's magical ability, the price is very cheap. The father becomes irritated and even starts kicking the child. Unable to bear watching it, Van buys the child at a high price, so the child will no longer be abused. Rosalie helps prepare a slave contract between them. After that, Van brings the child home. Time passes, and when Van turns 8, it is finally time for his magical abilities to be evaluated. Everyone has high expectations, believing he will at least possess fire or wind magic. However, the result reveals that he has production magic. His father believes production magic is the most useless magic because ordinary people can produce things without using magic at all. Disappointed, Jalpa even draws his sword and prepares to cut down his own son. At that moment, Merja interrupts and gives a reckless suggestion to their father. She suggests sending Van to manage a nameless remote village at the edge of their territory, a village that once became a battleground during a territorial war. Their father lowers his sword and agrees to Merja's proposal. Merja feels guilty for sending her younger brother to such a dangerous and unfamiliar place. However, Van actually thanks her because her suggestion saved him from his father's blood. Merja offers her hand and promises to help Van if he ever needs anything. Van quietly leaves his territory. At first, his father forbids the knights from escorting him. However, the knights who know Van well insist on going with him. Even Esparta, his tutor, takes early retirement to accompany him. Citizens were not supposed to know about Van's departure. However, D announces it because he knows how much the people care about them. After traveling a long distance, they finally arrive at the village. Unfortunately, the moment they reach it, they are immediately attacked by a group of bandits. At first, The adventurers refused to help, unwilling to risk their lives. The adventurers initially refused to help because, in their eyes, a noble child was nothing more than an arrogant figure who looked down on commoners and adventurers. Besides, they had only accepted an escort request from Merger recklessly, who wanted to charge forward alone. However, Esparta stopped him and chose to act as bait while creating a defensive wall so that they could attack from another side. Van did not want either of them to get hurt, so he decided to step forward himself. Tiru and Kansen also did not want their master to be injured, but Van insisted on his plan. He would ride the carriage and attack from the front while the others provided long-range support. Van did not mind if he had to die for his people, because to him that would be an honorable death. The adventurers, who had already begun to see Van as a different kind of noble, started to respect his determination and finally decided to help. They could not ignore a child who was willing to risk his life to protect them. Esparta and to quickly reorganize their strategy and began attacking the bandits. Esparta rapidly constructed a defensive wall, causing the bandits, who had not noticed their movements, to be overwhelmed by the sudden assault. Vice Commander Dim moved swiftly, striking back and forth while disabling several enemies at once. Attacked from two sides, the bandits were cornered and nearly defeated. The bandit leader then retreated behind a wall and began attacking from a distance. Van took advantage of his small body to slip through a narrow gap and slash the bandit's back, leaving him unable to move. Pelu Real was deeply moved by Van's actions. Even though Van was not yet 10 years old, he already acted like a true leader. Ordo also became interested in getting to know Van better and decided to stay in the village for a while. At first, his teammates planned to continue their mission and said their farewells. However, in the end, the members of Orto's team chose to remain because they wanted to see how Van would grow in the future. After entering the village, the village chief, Ronder, thanked them for saving the place. From Ronder, Van learned that the village had been frequently attacked ever since it became part of the Versio territory. The reason was simple: no knights ever patrolled the area. They briefly argued about the unfair laws of the country. However, Van firmly stated that their main priority was to make the village capable of surviving in a stable condition. He immediately reduced the village tax from 30% to 10%. In addition, Van built a temporary wall for protection, and the knights were assigned to dig a trench around it. Van then began testing his production magic. He created fiber-based blocks that were extremely light. However, when Ordo tried to cut one, the block turned out to be harder than stone. Most people with production magic can only create a single type of object, which is why many consider the magic useless. But Van was very different. He did not even feel tired despite creating many weapons at once. He stacked the blocks and asked the village for permission to build his own house. Everyone was amazed at the speed of construction and the size of the building created by an 8-year-old child. Van still believed that attack magic was the best way to protect the people. However, Tiru and Kansen disagreed with him. Esparta also interrupted and explained that attack magic was indeed essential during wartime, but in their current situation, what the people truly needed was a lord who could improve their quality of life. And in that regard, Esparta believed no one could answer their people's needs better than Van. The people around him also believed that Van's power far surpassed that of ordinary production magic users. Van then asked for wood so he could build houses for everyone. To fulfill the request, D and Ordo competed with each other to gather wood. Soon, the villagers began arriving and asked if their houses could also be repaired. Van agreed to their requests. He planned not only to fix them, but also to reorganize the entire layout of the village. The villagers were extremely excited about their new homes and offered their harvest as a sign of gratitude. Van even built a hot spring bath for relaxation, and the villagers happily enjoyed the new facility. Esparta used his strength to speed up the construction of the trench. However, since his energy was limited, the knights continued the work afterward. Van followed behind them, reinforcing the base and sides of the trench so it would not easily collapse. As the sun began to set, Van told everyone to rest and continue the work the next day. Then Van opened the dam to let the water flow. Van directed the water into the trench, worried that the water might overflow. He built an artificial reservoir behind the village to store excess water. Seeing the results, the villagers were overjoyed, and the village chief repeatedly thanked him because life in the village had now become much easier. Van then reinforced the earthen wall and turned it into a solid concrete wall. He even added basic ballista to strengthen the defenses, making the village resemble a small fortress. They felt it was unfortunate that Vin's abilities had never been appreciated by Marquis Jalver. However, Espada understood that the Marquis only valued the four elemental magics because they were more useful in direct combat. Dee argued that Vin's power was far more than just fighting ability, because war was not only about soldiers clashing on the battlefield. Espada added that Vin's power was more suited for protection rather than conquering territories through violence. Van stepped in to stop their argument. He did not want them to dwell in frustration over the situation or his talents. Instead, he wanted everyone to use the abilities they possessed and fight with what they had. At the dining table, they began discussing their food supplies, which were starting to run low. Even the ingredients for Vin's cakes had run out, making him feel almost threatened without something sweet to eat. Seriously, he began thinking about what products the village could sell so that their economy could start moving. Van later went outside to test a sword made from fiber blocks. Surprisingly, even a light strike was enough to damage a famous and expensive shield known for its durability. Fortunately, Van was able to repair it afterward. Ordo then arrived carrying raw materials he had obtained from a deep forest at the foot of the mountains, an area filled with powerful monsters. At Ordo's request, Van crafted both a short sword and a long sword. The results were so impressive that other adventurers became excited and asked Van to make weapons for them as well. Espada then speculated that there was likely an undiscovered dungeon somewhere around the region. Rare materials were usually found inside mountains, not forests. If they managed to claim the dungeon, the situation of the village would change drastically. People and goods would begin flowing in and out of the village. However, Van pointed out that they currently lacked the facilities and resources needed to support an adventurer's guild. In addition, neighboring countries might try to seize the dungeon for themselves, which could trigger attacks. He explained that he was considered a disgrace by the Versio family. If they discovered that his place of exile held great value, they might relocate him again. Therefore, Van planned to develop the village first and show real results before revealing the dungeon's existence. That way, the Versio family would have difficulty interfering. However, while Van was walking around the village, a pack of armored lizards suddenly attacked. The bridge was quickly raised, and the villagers panicked in fear. Even so, Van asked everyone to fight together to protect their village. Unfortunately, Ordo's group had gone hunting, leaving them short of defenders for the fortress. Van wanted to go to the battlefield himself, but tears stopped him out of fear that something terrible might happen. In the end, Van entrusted the front line to Dee while he would give orders from below. It turned out that the armored lizard pack consisted of 40 monsters, each standing nearly 8 meters tall. The situation was extremely dangerous. Even a group of veteran knights would struggle to defeat a single armored lizard. Van ordered Dee to load iron bolts into the ballista. Die's subordinates doubted the decision, since the monster's skin was said to be harder than iron itself. However, Dee chose to trust his lord. When the ballista fired, the iron bolt shot forward so fast that it seemed to vanish. When they looked again, they realized the bolt had pierced through the monster's skull and exited from the other side. The supply of iron bolts was only enough for the second wave. After that, Van ordered them to switch to wooden bolts because he knew that even fiber blocks made from wood could cut through shields. Thanks to the ballista created by Van, the village achieved a decisive victory without a single casualty. After the battle, they began skinning the monsters and separating the organs that could be sold or consumed. Seeing the large piles of meat, Van decided to hold a feast that night. For the first time in a long while, the entire village experienced true happiness. Although Van's kindness toward common people might be considered inappropriate for a noble, that very attitude only made him more respected. Van later spoke with Ordo about selling the lizard meat. With that much meat, they estimated it could earn around 300 gold coins. Espada explained that if a village produced more than 100 gold coins in profit, the tax owed to the Marquis could reach up to 50%. With profits that large, it would be impossible for the nobles not to notice. Espada suggested that the report should be delivered to Merges so that he could receive recognition for defeating the lizard asterisk the next day. Merchants from the Mari Chamber of Commerce arrived and were shocked to see the warehouse filled with lizard skins, claws, and meat. They couldn't transport everything with just one wagon and planned to call their colleagues for help. However, Fan stopped them because he wanted to introduce the village's product high-quality weapons and asked them to help promote it, but it seemed they intended to monopolize the weapon trade. Realizing their intentions, Fan decided to build his own weapon shop and asked them to manage it instead not long after. While Fan was planning the village's development, an adult woman and a young girl appeared at the gate. One of the knights reported that they were envoys from the Ferdinando territory. The woman was Viscountess Panamera, and the girl beside her was Artie, the youngest daughter of Count Ferdinando. Their visit was not merely to greet the new village leader, who was rumored to be a genius. They wanted to make sure that Fan had no hidden ambitions toward the territory of Marquis Fercio. Panamera questioned how Fan could build a fortress in such a short time. She suspected that Fan had brought many people to turn the remote village into a new military outpost. Fan chuckled softly and quickly apologized for his reaction. He asked for permission to clear up the misunderstanding. He explained that he had actually been exiled by his father and was only allowed to bring his slave and his single wagon of belongings. His family had not even seen him. Alfardi was surprised to hear this because she had experienced something similar herself. Though Fan did not know that Knight D added that he had come of his own will. He had even ignored the order from the Knight Order to return to them. Espada explained that he simply wanted to spend his retirement teaching Fan everything he knew. Teru also emphasized that Fan had never discriminated against those of lower status, which was why he wished to serve Fan forever. Fan then explained the process of building the fortress. Espada first constructed earthen walls, and then Fan reinforced them into concrete walls using his production magic. He also created a massive gate made from fiber blocks. Artie asked about Fan's talent, and Fan replied that he possessed production magic, often referred to as the most unfortunate type of magic. Those words reminded Artie of her painful past because of a talent considered useless. Fan had been cast out by his own family, while his father had yet to realize its true potential. Panamera regretted this, as Fan's power should have allowed the Marquis to expand his territory drastically. Finally, Panamera spoke honestly. She revealed that she had been ordered to arrange a marriage between Artie and Fan. At first, she opposed the idea, but after seeing Fan in person, she admitted that he possessed insight far beyond his age. His ability to unite people and turn misfortune into opportunity, combined with his extraordinary magic, convinced her that Artie would live a better life with him. Now, the decision rested with Artie. Shyly, Artie replied that she didn't yet understand her feelings. Fan then said he had not thought about marriage yet, because it was a major decision that should not be rushed. He suggested that they take things slowly. Hearing that, Artie felt relieved. The next day, an unexpected species appeared from the artificial lake Fan had created. She was a small girl from the Abkalulu race. Since she was difficult to talk to, Fan offered her a plate of meat. The little girl approached and ate it. After tasting the meat, she asked who had defeated the lizard. Everyone agreed that it was Fan. After that, the little girl dived back into the water. Espada said that Abkalulu were a rare species, so they likely wouldn't return. However, the next day, a whole group of Abkalulu arrived together with their leader. Lotta Fester asked if it was true that Fan had defeated the lizard. Fan answered yes immediately. Lotta Fester gave her blessing for Fan to marry her daughter. She was Lotta Priora, the same little girl who had appeared before. Fan felt that Lotta Priora was still too young and did not yet understand marriage. So he asked what Lotta Festa's true intention was in offering her daughter. Lotta Fester explained that her people had always avoided humans. However, recently the lizard had invaded their river, and many of her people had died because of that. She sought a strong man to become Lotta Priora's husband and ensure a peaceful place for her people to live. Van politely refused. He said that even without marriage, he was willing to protect their people. Lotta Fester then asked for permission for her tribe to settle in the lake. Since they had reached an agreement, Van provided them with a comfortable place to live. In return, Lotta Festa offered to help manage the village's wastewater channels. At that moment, Artie and Panamera arrived. A misunderstanding occurred when Lotta Festa referred to Van as her future son-in-law. To make matters worse, Lotta Priora herself declared that she was Van's wife the next morning. Van invited Artie to talk privately in the middle of the lake. He explained that yesterday's incident was just a misunderstanding. It turned out that Artie already knew because Panamera had explained everything to her. Hearing that, Van felt relieved suddenly. Lotta Priora appeared and asked who the girl with Van was. Artie politely introduced herself. However, other Abkalular children suddenly showed up asking for meat. They made the boat rock back and forth until Artie lost her balance and fell into Van's arms. This incident made Lotta Priora jealous. Meanwhile, the other children rocked the boat even harder because they thought Van was teasing Priora. Lotta Festa later heard the rumor that Van was flirting with another woman even though he already had her daughter. Van clearly had no intention of becoming Priora's husband, but Lotta Festa insisted and challenged him to a competition. If Van lost the competition, he would have to marry Priora. He enthusiastically accepted the challenge, and Espada also wanted the matter to be resolved quickly so Van could return to focusing on his studies. Lotta Festa proposed 3 rounds. For the first round, Van was allowed to choose the type of contest. After thinking for a moment, Van decided on a polo competition. However, Lotta Festa's team won decisively in the first round. For the second round, Lotta Festa chose a relay swimming race, which clearly favored the Abkalula since they were water creatures. Dee volunteered to compete, and Kamsen also joined to help his master win. Unfortunately, Kamsen was not fast enough to beat Priora when it was Dai's turn. He used the butterfly stroke at incredible speed, shocking everyone by winning a competition that should have been dominated by the fish-like race. For the third round, Lotta Festa allowed Van to decide the contest. Van chose a shaved ice eating contest. He and Artie participated in the competition at first. All the contestants suffered from sharp headaches due to the freezing cold. However, Van refused to give up. Seeing his determination, Artie sped up her pace as well. Together, they finished their shaved ice first, making Van the winner. Instead of giving up, Lotta Festa liked Van even more. To her, it was proof that Van was truly worthy of her daughter. On the other hand, Artie wanted to grow closer to Van. Since childhood, her father had always been busy and rarely visited her. Her mother didn't care either and left her upbringing entirely to the servants. The reason was simple: Artie was considered a failed product. Artie was a timid child. Her academic scores were poor, and she had no special talents except puppet magic. When she once tried to entertain her mother with that magic, her mother slapped her and called her a pathetic child. Artie knew that puppet magic was considered evil and despised among the nobles. Because of it, she was avoided and looked down upon. When she was 10 years old, her father ordered her to become engaged. At first, she felt anxious, but after meeting Van, she felt somewhat relieved. They shared something in common. They both possessed magic that people considered useless. The difference was that Van was confident and able to use his gift with optimism. Seeing that inspired Artie to start training her magic again. She decided to watch and learn from Van's work up close for 2 weeks. Van built a fortress with Espada to expand the city's layout. Panamera noticed Van's ballista, which could fire arrows quickly and with great power. She expressed her desire to buy it. Van refused because the ballista was not for sale. However, Panamera did not give up and offered one favor in exchange for a single ballista. Van happily accepted the offer. Suddenly, a dragon attacked Orto and the adventurers tried to escape from its pursuit. Fortunately, the dragon was only a mid-class monster, so it did not have the ability to breathe fire. Van immediately ordered the adventurers to enter the fortress because he would try to shoot the dragon down. Using his new ballista, Panamera offered to help. She instructed her knights to escort Artie back to the village. The dragon drew closer. Van ordered the ballista to be prepared and aimed at the dragon's wings first. Unfortunately, the first shot missed. The shot missed because the dragon managed to dodge it. Panamera was already on top of the fortress, preparing to help. Earning the title of Piscontes at a young age was not just a formality. Panamera was a high-class elemental mage recognized by the kingdom. However, the dragon still hadn't fallen. The next ballister shot was also avoided. Even though one of its wings had been pierced, the dragon was now moving even faster. Especially in reading the pattern of attacks, the adventurers finally arrived at the gate. Panamera released another fire spell, and once again the dragon dodged. Fortunately, Panamera had excellent control over her magic, so it didn't hit the fortress. She then requested permission to withdraw and help protect the inner defenses. Van ordered everyone to retreat to the village. The dragon's wings were badly burned, but it was still able to climb the fortress and destroy one of the ballistas. Seeing Espada step forward made Van anxious. Van said that if Espada didn't retreat, then he wouldn't retreat either. Espada turned and said that just this once, he would hold the dragon back there. He created a massive chunk of earth and slammed it onto the dragon's body. Van ordered Espada to retreat, but because of his age, he wasn't fast enough to run. Kamson declared he would stay with Espada and told Van to return to organizing the village's defenses. Panamera had already taken position inside. At that moment, Van called in a favor. He explained his plan. When the dragon approached the fortress, Panamera would lock its movement with magic, and then they would bombard it with ballister fire. D ran forward to face the dragon, but his attack was swatted away by the dragon's powerful claws. Two of his subordinates immediately blocked with shields so he wouldn't be severely injured. Espada created an earth shield to protect them. Sensing the situation, they decided to retreat immediately when the dragon let its guard down. The iron arrow crafted by Van finally pierced through the dragon's steel-like scales. Still sensing a faint pulse of life in the dragon, Dee immediately leaped forward and beheaded it from within the smoke. At last, they could breathe a sigh of relief. Victory was theirs on Panamera's suggestion. Dee, who had beheaded the dragon, was named the MVP of the battle. Van then held an official gathering to thank everyone who had contributed. Panamera stated that the dragon had the power to erase an entire village or even a city from the map. Even a fortified city might not have survived. Yet this small village had not only survived, but had done so without a single casualty. The only losses were part of the fortress and to ballistas. Panamera then mentioned those who had contributed the most. First was D, the deputy commander of the Versio Knight Order, who delivered the decisive blow. Second was Espada, who held back the dragon's movement, and lastly, unexpectedly, she mentioned Van's name. The villagers cheered even louder. Meanwhile, Van himself felt embarrassed hearing such praise. In her heart, Panamera admitted that she had never met someone like Van before, especially at such a young age. He was already able to lead with great responsibility. Panamera then stepped forward and declared the formation of an alliance with Van. She knew that Van did not receive support from his father, but with this alliance, Panamera guaranteed her backing so that Van would no longer need to worry about threats from Knight Conferdinado. For Van, this was a golden opportunity to develop the village into something greater, so he accepted the alliance. The next day, in Van's office, Espada proposed that they begin planning a city layout capable of housing up to 10,000 residents. To build an attractive and prosperous city, they would need new settlers. Not long after, Tiru entered with news that Bell and Rongo from the Mori Trade Chamber had returned with their group. In addition, they intended to purchase dragon materials. Van discussed the matter with Bell and Rongo. After calculating everything, it was estimated that he could earn at least 100 platinum, worth around 10 billion yen. However, an old merchant offered only 60 platinum. Van was confused because the offer was far below the original estimate. After discussing it again with Bell and Rongo, it was revealed that the old merchant had indeed intended to buy the materials far below market price. An argument broke out among the merchants. The old merchant insisted that no other traders would come to such a remote village for an entire year, so Van should accept the low price. But Bell and Rongo rejected the unfair approach. They wanted to negotiate honestly based on the quality of the materials, believing that honesty would bring long-term profit. Feeling threatened, The old merchant threatened to report them to the head of the merchant guild, which could end Belle and Rongo's careers immediately after that. He left the two of them behind. They asked Van whether they would be fine even if they were expelled from the company. Belle and Tango admitted that they didn't have many choices left. Hearing that, Van proposed that they start their own trading company. Both of them were shocked, because that would be extremely difficult. They would need to pay registration fees to the merchant guild, have a physical shop, and obtain support from a titled noble. Van believed the first and second requirement could still be solved. As for the third, he remembered the only titled noble nearby, Viscountess Panamera. Panamera had no objection to supporting the small company. In her view, recognizing a new company would not harm the Mori trade chamber, which was supported by the royal family. In fact, the kingdom's reputation might suffer if honest merchants were prevented from growing. Moreover, supporting honest merchants would improve her own reputation, and she indeed wanted to rise in rank so she could obtain her own territory and army. Van then asked why Panamera didn't simply claim that she was the one who defeated the dragon. However, Panamera refused. Her reason was simple: it was impossible for a single person to defeat a dragon alone, and any investigation would eventually lead back to Van instead. Panamera suggested that Van should obtain his own title by announcing that he was the one who defeated the dragon. She would only be credited for holding the dragon back. While Van and his forces delivered the final blow, Van hesitated because he didn't want to stand out too much and attract new enemies. Another problem soon appeared. Belle and Tang's carriage had been taken away by the old merchant. As a form of pressure, Van immediately built a new carriage for them, and Panamera lent them her warhorse so they could quickly chase after the deceitful merchant. Soon after, Panamera traveled to the capital to meet the king of the kingdom of Scuderia. She submitted a request for Van, the fourth son of Marquis Versio, to be granted a noble title. Panamera explained Van's achievements since arriving at the village, defeating bandits, building the fortress and town, and leading the troops during the battle against the dragon. She honestly described how the dragon had been defeated and presented one of the dragon's fangs as proof. The king was impressed, and even expressed interest in visiting the village himself. Not long afterward, an announcement was made. Van was officially appointed as a baron. The entire kingdom was shocked to hear that an 8-year-old boy had defeated a dragon. Van then rebuilt the city layout on a grander scale. He constructed two towers that served both as symbols of the settlement and as watchtowers to detect enemies from afar. One day, they had lunch on top of one of the towers while chatting casually. Then they noticed a group of people outside the fortress. After they were allowed inside, it turned out they were villagers from a neighboring village in Ferdinando territory, which was extremely poor. They wanted to negotiate with the residents of Seattle village, which was now led by Van. Their village lacked young men because Khan had previously taken them to strengthen his army in preparation for war. Van didn't mind if they wanted to settle in his territory. However, the newcomers didn't have money to pay taxes. Van temporarily exempted them from taxes and provided one house for each family in return. Since they had 10 cows, they offered the dairy cows to Van. Adventurers escorted around 300 villagers as they migrated to Van's territory during the journey. Some people complained because they were tired of constantly relocating, especially to such a remote region. However, Orto reassured them that Van's village was like paradise when they finally arrived. The newcomers were warmly welcomed by Van and the villagers. Van invited them to eat. First, they enjoyed grilled meat with deep gratitude. After the meal, they asked Van if there were any jobs available. Van offered work at the inns and new shops he had established, as well as in new farmland that needed to be cultivated. The village chief added that the original residents were ready to help the newcomers adapt and enjoy their new lives, with trade opening up and the population increasing. The village grew larger and more prosperous. Van hoped that his people could live relaxed lives and enjoy peace. Soon after, a spotter ordered Van to return to his studies. Hearing that shocked Van. He felt the order was excessive since he had just finished working so hard. But according to a spotter, it wasn't excessive at all. In fact, he had never seen anyone die from studying. Not long afterward, Ordo and his two companions reported that they had discovered the entrance to a dungeon according to a spotter. Any dungeon discovery must be reported immediately. The reason was that if the information spread, many adventurers would come, and Van's father might also learn about the rapid development of the village. Van then assigned Kusara as a messenger to the capital. Meanwhile, Ordo and the others were tasked with exploring the area around the dungeon at first. Kusara felt reluctant about the task, and Ordo also felt burdened. However, Ordo immediately became excited when Van promised a reward of 1 large gold coin. Meanwhile, Kusara received a mithril dagger, which made his two companions extremely jealous after receiving the reward. Kusara immediately set out to carry out his mission. Along the way, he encountered a group of monsters attacking a carriage. Normally, those monsters would have been quite troublesome, but thanks to the weapon given by Van, Kusara was able to defeat them with ease. A woman inside the carriage thanked him when they introduced themselves. The woman said her name was Flamira. Kusara, on the other hand, claimed that he was just an ordinary adventurer. However, Flamira considered him a renowned adventurer because of how agile his movements were. Coincidentally, Flamira was also heading to the capital, so they decided to continue the journey together. Since Flamira was currently struggling and didn't yet have a clear destination, Kusara suggested that she come with him to the border village, because there would surely be a job suitable for her there. Meanwhile, Van told Espada that he wanted to build a new town outside the village to accommodate the adventurers who would come in the future. According to Espada, they would need a manager to oversee the new town, and he volunteered to take that role. However, to maintain security, Espada also believed they should form a night order separate from the village's forces. On the same day, construction of the town began. They measured the land and prepared various materials. Thanks to the cooperation of everyone involved, the construction progressed smoothly. According to Van's estimate, the town could be completed in just 1 month while the others were working. Van briefly thought about recruiting the workers as knights. However, it turned out they had already been recruited by Espada and had even signed contracts not long afterward. Kusara returned to the village. He had completed his report in the capital and came back together with Flamira when meeting Van. Flamira explained that she had been attacked by a group of orcs near the capital. To her, Kusara was far greater than any hero because he had saved her life. Soon after, a group of dungeon-seeking adventurers arrived. Their appearance looked intimidating, but in reality, they cared about the safety of others, worried about possible monster attacks. They advised Van and the others to return home immediately. Van replied that if anything happened, they could take shelter in the village. When Van pointed to the village behind him, the adventurers were shocked to see the massive walls surrounding it. They were also surprised to learn that the boy standing before them was Van Nefertio, who had often become the subject of gossip in the capital. Seeing Van treated like an ordinary child made Commander De Furious as the commander of the Seattle Knights. He taught those mohawk-haired adventurers a lesson. Once they realized how strong D was, their attitude changed immediately. Since then, they always saluted him whenever they met. Even so, they still considered Van a unique child, since he had already become a lord at such a young age. Ordo and the others had just returned from the dungeon. Seeing Kusara bring a woman with him shocked them. Ordo even felt jealous because Van planned to build a house for Kusara and Flamir. Van then asked about the condition of the dungeon they had investigated. Pluriel answered that almost no monsters had appeared, but the entrance was located near a steep cliff and quite far from their village because the terrain was so extreme. They had only been able to build small outposts. Therefore, Pluriel asked Van for help in building a more proper base. Van was actually reluctant to go. He preferred to relax and focus on building the town in the village. However, since Pluriel kept insisting, he was eventually forced to agree, with many people escorting him. Van set off toward the dungeon. Along the way, they were briefly blocked by monsters, but the mohawk-haired adventurers quickly defeated them. Meanwhile, Root and Tiru looked delighted. For them, the journey felt more like entertainment. Soon, a deep ravine appeared before them. At first, the adventurers intended to cross it using a large log, But Van immediately stopped them because the method was too dangerous. Seeing adventurers who ignored their own safety frustrated Van, he climbed down, scolded them, and taught them the importance of safety after that. He built a sturdy bridge that was safe to cross once they crossed the ravine. They arrived at the entrance of the dungeon. Van began building a base there to prevent monsters from coming out. He constructed a gate at the dungeon entrance with the help of the adventurers. They then built lodging facilities. Van designed the base extremely well so that adventurers could conquer the dungeon comfortably. The first floor was used as a warehouse and resting area. Van also built a terrace outside so the adventurers could enjoy the scenery. The top floor was designed as the bedroom for the adventurers after everything was finished. The management of the base was handed over to Ordo since the sun was starting to set. Van invited everyone to return home immediately. He couldn't stay there too long because he was afraid a spotter would scold him. However, when they arrived back at the village, a spotter was already waiting at the gate to avoid being scolded. Van tried to ask the others for help, but they were also too afraid of a spotter to oppose him. Morto tried to explain that everything they did was a shared responsibility, but a spotter told him to be quiet and immediately dragged Van inside.